Welcome to the PFAS Management and Emerging Contaminants Regulatory Trends, Treatment Advances, and Global Applications. So we have 4 presentations this afternoon. So regulations will be the first one by Nicholas Albergo. And I'd like to make a comment on regulations. So already EPA has petitioned to pull back some of the monitoring for certain groups like the PFHXS, PFBA, PFNA, and GenX. So it'll be an interesting landscape on regulatory affairs in the new administration. So with that, I'd like to present Mr. Nicholas Albergo.
Hold your applause. I haven't disappointed you yet. Do I have a clicker? This is the clicker. The green one. Good morning. Good afternoon. See, Jared, this is why we can't have nice things. We used to look at this type of garbage and we'd go out and we'd clean it up and feel good about ourselves that we've done something good, but the reality is that the really bad stuff we can't see, and so it really does very little anymore to clean up what we can see when it comes to worrying about the environment and our health, and that's becoming a bigger and bigger issue for us. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to just talk extremely briefly about PFAS, but mostly because I want to use it as a case study and a bellwether for what I see are some much bigger issues coming down the pike than what we have with PFAS. And so I thought I'd start out with just talking a little bit about the definition. When you think about emerging contaminants, we're talking about things for the most part that we can't see. And they're new. They have worldwide concerns associated with them. And currently they go completely undetected and unmonitored. And as a result, we've got a lot of PFAS-like issues coming down the road that are going to wind up being even greater in terms of how they can impact us than our current discussions on PFAS. All of them have some commonalities to them, and they're all the result of advancements in chemical manufacturing and the way we create new stuff, if you will. They've all got unintended consequences as a result. All of them have this tendency to bioaccumulate, which is a big problem, because as it bioaccumulates and increases in our food chain, eventually with us being the apex predators, it's going to wind up on our doorstep. And the reality is that our regulations can't keep pace. And EPA has gotten into a really, really bad practice of deciding what they want to regulate and then trying to find the science after the fact to justify the regulation. And as you just heard, one of the reasons we've stepped back on 4 of the 6 PFAS compounds in regulation is because we don't have the science to back it up, and we got called to the floor on it. Right? There's litigation out there right now saying EPA had no justification for establishing the limits, and EPA raised the white flag and said, you're right, and so they've backed off on it. And so essentially, we've got to kind of go back to the drawing board in a lot of respects. How do we define these emerging contaminants? PFAS being a great example. I'll talk about that in a moment. Then what do we do to regulate them? And then the more important issue then is at what scale can we practically treat this stuff? Because even if we can define that it's a concern and we can establish some regulations, we've only got a certain amount of money to deal with and only have a certain amount of technology that works. And so at some point, we've got to be somewhat practical about our approach to how we address this. And PFAS is just, like I said, it's the bellwether, if you will. It's a case study, right? It's an example where, how many PFAS compounds do we regulate right now? How many? Two, right? PFOS and PFO. If you look at the NIH, they claim we've got about 7 million PFAS out there that we can create. If you look at the EPA toxicity database, they've identified 15,000. We know of about 260 that are commonly being manufactured throughout the country, and we regulate 2. Okay? And these are mixtures. And so you wonder, what exactly are we doing here, right? They're all similar in the idea that they've got a backbone that's carbon and fluorine based. And of course, the smaller atoms associated with the backbone are also why we have persistence and why we've got the stability we do. And then you've got the business end, the alkyl end, that does all the work, if you will. And we've got all sorts of different working ends. Some are oil or water or stain resistant. And so there are some commonalities to this massive group, if you will. But the chain lengths, as an example, matter a lot. And what we're finding is the shorter chain lengths or the ultra short chain lengths might even be a bigger issue than the longer ones like a PFOS or a PFO. And then the other thing that we don't talk enough about is we keep talking about persistence and about forever, but that's doesn't really equate to risk. Risk doesn't necessarily equal persistence. And so in many respects, the way we're looking at PFAS and the way we're trying to regulate it, I think are off base. And we're about to invest an incredible amount of money to go down a path that we haven't even frickin' defined yet. If you look at how we define PFAS, we're all over the place right now. I'll give you a couple examples. So the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, they want to include one fully fluorinated methyl or methylene carbon atom to call it a PFAS. The ITRC says, well, we want to call things PFAS, but we want to carve out the pharmaceuticals and the crop protection agencies and the refrigerants, and we were going to pull that all out of the definition of a PFAS, even though they are PFAS. TSCA is all over the place. Right? TSCA has this whole idea that we're going to look at moieties, which are essentially segments of the molecule. We're going to look at saturated carbons for their atom bonding capacity. We're going to look for the R groups associated with acidity or polarity. I mean, who the hell knows this shit, right? I mean, and then if you want to go beyond this, you can go to the states. You know, the states have their own definitions of PFAS. Some of them want 2 fully fluorinated carbon atoms instead of 1. Some of them have their own pet projects going on. New Mexico says we're going to exclude the fluoropolymers. Well, of course, because they've got a robust semiconductor business down there, and that's what we use in the semiconductor business. The Department of Agriculture has its own definition. In fact, in June, the Department of Agriculture just approved a new pesticide for crops that's a PFAS. Okay? And so if we can't even define this shit, how are we supposed to regulate this stuff? And I think that, it should start there. And that's why I call it a case study, because the reality is, if we don't define it in the beginning, we're going to wind up going down roads that are really bad for us in terms of how we spend our limited money. So when you think about the universe of PFAS, we've got polymers and non-polymers, we got solids, liquids, gases, we got volatile and non-volatile compounds, we got water-soluble and water-insoluble compounds, all of them representing different potential human health risks, some of which are of no risk to human health at all. If you go to the inorganic compounds, PFAS compounds, or the fluorine-based polymers, they're not even bioavailable. And so at some point, we've got to define what it is we're concerned about and then focus our energies on trying to quantify the risk associated with just those that we're concerned about. And again, I'm using this as the bellwether because for the rest of my talk, it's going to be the common theme here. Okay? So there's lots of ways we could go about organizing PFAS. I guess we could evaluate them as a single chemical class and throw it all together, but then you got a bunch of stuff that isn't bioavailable that would be in there that's going to skew the data in detection, and we're going to wind up overshooting and being way over conservative. That doesn't work. We could group them together, I guess, depending on different ideas of their structure and so forth, which would create a bunch of different groups that are, not the universe, but it'll take a while for us to come up with the risk-based strategies to look at these various groups. We could do like the read-across tables that we've used for other things like PCBs, where we try to, look at essentially predict the properties, predict the potential health effects, because we know something about one PFAS, so let's apply that to others. But that's not a very scientific way to go about it. And then the bottom line is, even if we did that, since they're all mixtures and we don't know a lot about the mixtures, well, none of that's really going to work all that well. And so the issue we've got, using PFAS as just one case study, is that it's going to create a lot of ambiguity in just how we identify what a PFAS is. And if that's the case, how are we supposed to compare our various scientific articles, apples to apples, if our articles are considering different definitions of what it is they're studying, what their results are tied to, okay? And if we don't know what it is, and our articles don't jive with each other, and there's no way to compare apples to apples, we're going to have a lot of very broad and inefficient regulation associated with it. It's going to completely confuse compliance in the marketplace. It's going to turn monitoring and remediation on its head, because what exactly are we trying to clean up? What are the goals? It's going to obviously increase the costs. And more importantly, I think, is that it stifles so much of our innovation, right? If we're not aware of what we're going to target. I mean, think about it. Who's going to invest in technology to clean up PFAS if we haven't defined what it is they're supposed to be cleaning up? And so I use this as the bellwether because this is going to continue to haunt us, not only PFAS, but as we go farther down the road. And so let's look as an example at microparticles, microplastics, whatever the hell they're calling them these days. ASTM uses microparticles instead of microplastics. And my issue with that is, if we're going to talk about microparticles, we're also talking about pollen and dust and minerals and metal oxides and silicas, even certain kinds of targeted pharmaceuticals. I don't think that's what we mean by microplastics. So if we want to talk about microplastics, the way we've got them identified right now is we do it just based on size. But the reality is that's a very rudimentary way of looking at microplastics. Morphology matters a lot, right? The shape of that particle matters. Its chemical composition. What is the type and surface properties associated with that particle? What is its reactive qualities? And so those things affect detection, which means it's going to affect assessment. It affects regulation. And of course it affects treatment, just like PFAS. So here again, we're running down the microplastics train without any definition. And without that, I think we're going to wind up having huge problems down the road that are going to be magnified even further than we already are with PFAS. And by the way, it's not unusual that these things are synergistics. You find the microplastics and the PFAS together. So just like PFAS, we're going to have, which is, it's another, microplastics are persistent. Microplastics accumulate. In fact, right now there's studies out there that say we consume somewhere in the neighborhood of a credit card weight per week in microplastics in our body. Okay, think about that. And yet, some of the papers I've been seeing coming out in the marketplace are about research of, soils, microplastics in soils. Well, who cares? I mean, there's bigger issues. Do you know where the largest concentration of microplastics is? It's in the Inuit Eskimos, because of the amount of seafood that they ingest and the amount of microplastics that our sea life are ingesting. And so it almost looks like we're looking in the wrong place. It's like we're getting off on tangents, and I think it's because we haven't defined things well. We don't understand things that well. So I talk about, what's on your mind, okay? These are some real statistics. The microplastics in our human brain have rose 50% from 2016 to 2024. We have an average of 7 grams in our flipping brain, okay? Think about that. We have no global standard. We're not even close, right? We have gaps in even the definition. And keep in mind, one of the biggest issues with microplastics is it's tied to dementia. How do we determine risk these days? We do it based on cancer. So microplastics isn't a cancer issue as much as it is a brain issue, a dementia issue. We won't even pick it up through our traditional risk-based approaches. So if we keep going at the rate we're going, we're going to have a whole fucking cutlery set in our brain within the next 10, 15 years. Right? I mean, so something has to give here. We're not paying attention to the right stuff. All right, here's one you probably haven't even heard of. Anybody remember that dude? The tires ain't pretty. Anybody remember that guy? Anybody from Florida remember that guy? He was cool as hell. Remember that? So there's this stuff out there called, and how many people even know what this is? 6-PPD. 6-P phenyldiamine quinone. Okay? You don't know about it because you're in Florida, but if you were in the West Coast, you'd know all about it. Okay? This stuff is everywhere. We used it to protect natural rubber. It's a stabilizer from cracking. It breaks down with time. It's extremely toxic to aquatic life, and so much so that it is single-handedly wiping out the coho, salmon, and trout in the West Coast. So much so that we've lost 90% of the fisheries already as a result. Within the next 10 years, the entire growth cycle will have collapsed for the trout and the coho salmon. Just the result of this one stabilizer, okay? And so while we run around and have PFAS and, talk about, why God, what are we going to do? There are so many other things out there. And the bottom line is, as is with all of these, it's all about detection and quantification. Does that sound familiar? I mean, it's the same thing. The challenge we got with the 6-PPD is it's dirty. And so oftentimes it winds up in stormwater runoff because it's a stabilizer with the rubber and the tires on the roads. But think about what it's like for the lab folks in here to try to analyze things in stormwater runoff. You got organic matter, you got metals, you got other pollutants that yield matrix interference. And so it's really hard to detect the actual 6-PPD, especially if we're going to try to get down to the levels like we did with PFAS. It's going to be impossible. And so something's going to have to give. What makes it even worse is that this 6-PPD, as I mentioned, breaks down. It degrades because of pH and light and ozone and microbial action. So depending on when you go about monitoring and detecting it, it's at different stages of toxicity. Okay? And so unless we understand that kind of detail, our rush to try to regulate like the West Coast is all for naught, because we're just shooting blindly. And so, and forget remediation. We don't have a way to remediate it. We don't have any alternatives right now to substitute for the 6 ppd. So this just gives you an example of the things that are coming down the pike that we haven't even started to address. PFAS is the soup du jour. Most of you knew about microplastics. Now I'm getting into stuff that you probably haven't even thought about, but are all going to be the same thing. And then if you want to get really freaky, we can start talking about the pharmaceutical and hormones that are hitting in every which way and have been for a very long time in this country. In fact, throughout the world, we've got these non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, the Aleve and the Prox and all those things that pass through us right into the wastewater treatment plants, absolutely no treatment. We've got growth hormones from all our livestock that we're pumping with this stuff to try to keep up with our food demands. We've got natural hormones associated with our birth control pills. And see, it's always the women's fault. But all that stuff is going down the toilet. It's not being treated. And as a result, we've got serious issues on our hands. We're seeing it disrupt our reproductive systems, our fertility, our growth. We're already seeing feminization in fish as a result of the estrogen that's passing through from our wastewater plants. There was a big study done in Florida on alligator penises. They're shrinking. Yeah, you might think that's funny, but what if you were an alligator? Right? Ain't so funny then, is it? So the point is that we probably ought to be looking at emerging contaminants more globally and not, blow our entire monetary wad on PFAS that we haven't even defined yet. We haven't even figured out whether it's actually that bad for us. And I think that's a big issue. I think we need to take a step back and think more about what we're doing. So let's see if I got anything more I want to say on that. Nah, it's the same. Look at it. I'm just repeating myself about detection, monitoring, treatment, right? They all have the same issue associated with them. The difference is I'm trying to get to show you that if you really want to be freaked out, PFAS is not the hill to die on. This is the stuff that's going to get us. This is the real deal stuff that we're not talking about, we haven't even started to think about, and that the only way you can start to address it would be through tertiary treatment at our wastewater treatment plants. And if you think PFAS treatment is expensive, you ain't seen nothing yet compared to what it's going to cost to try to deal with this kind of stuff. And we have the same problems, okay? We haven't really defined it all exactly. We don't have regulation for it. We've got all sorts of analytical detection challenges when we get into pharmaceuticals and hormones. We have no way of controlling it. We haven't even started or attempted to control it. And then there's other things out there. This is another one that's showing up, medium chain chlorinated paraffins. These are associated with metalworking fluids, flame retardants, plasticizers. They're additives that we've put in these various things. And what's weird, and this seems to be happening to us more and more, is they call them regrettable substitutes because we actually developed these to try to get around short-chain chlorinated paraffins. And now we're finding out the medium chains are even more dangerous than the ones we tried to get away from. Well, guess what? That's exactly what's happening with PFAS. EPA is regulating these Mac Daddy long chain PFAS, like PFOS and PFOA, long chain being maybe, 6 to 8 carbon on the backbone. And what we're finding, what's happening is that industry is ending around and saying, all right, you don't want us to make those, we won't. We'll just make shorter chain ones that aren't defined yet. Well, the shorter chain ones are even more dangerous, we're finding out, okay? And so with the little toxicity data we have. And so the more we try to regulate without understanding what's going on, the more we're promoting industry to end around. And the problem with that is they're rogue. They end around and we wind up with a situation that's worse than what we started with. And it's the same problem over and over again. They're persistent. They bioaccumulate. They travel long distances throughout the world. We're finding the greatest concentration of these chlorinated paraffins in polar regions where they shouldn't be there at all. So they're in of themselves a big issue. And then on top of that, we have things called congeners. Okay, congeners are the minor compounds that result from the manufacturing process. The reason the U.S. environmental people here are hung over today is the congeners in the distillation process. Okay, just to give you an example, okay? These impurities are a big problem for us because they factor into risk and we don't bother to test for them or monitor them at all. And so even if we started to take on the process of dealing with the chemicals I've been talking about, we haven't even begun to deal with what happens with the congeners. And so this 5 minutes. Listen, I'm a professor. I'll go until I decide to stop. I go until the kids start slamming their books and closing. They'll let me know when it's time to go. We have no problem with that. All right. Well, then we will fast forward a little bit, okay? So there's others, right? We can talk about 1,4-dioxane. You already know about that one. That's in our chlorinated solvents, and we didn't look for it until recently. We got the same problem with those. It's in our drinking water. We didn't test for it. We didn't monitor for it. It's representing widespread contamination. We're finding concentrations of it that suggest we've got risk-based issues. But the bottom line is that all of these have synergistic effects, and we haven't even really touched on that. They tend to hang out together, and when they're together, we wind up with a 2 + 2 = 5. So even if we were to spend all that money on trying to develop risk-based solutions as much as we could to the individuals, we haven't even begun to talk about what are we going to do with the synergy between these. And so the inherent defect or flaw of PFAS predisposes the future problems that we're going to have. So here's the Albergo strategy for how we deal with all this, all right? The first is we need to fully fund EPA research programs to at least start to better understand these things. That's going to be tough because Trump shut down the Office of Research and Development. So currently we have no Office of Research and Development, so I'm not sure how we're going to do that, but that would have been a proposed thing to do. Discharge. I think we've got to look at practical approaches to minimize release and disposal. I think we got to prioritize cleanup. Honestly, I don't really see us chasing after soil and groundwater treatment for this stuff. I think we treat it at the water treatment plant because that oral ingestion is probably the most risky, and that's about the best we can do with the money we've got. So I'm sorry, I know that that's probably counter for some folks here to not be able to deal with it in water, groundwater and soil, but I just don't think we can afford to do it. We need to evaluate things from a cost-benefit scenario. We've got X amount of money. Where do we want to spend it? How do we want to spend it? I think we need to smartly collect data. And what I mean by that is that, you know, it's unfair to ask industry to collect data on itself and then report on itself through TSCA when it becomes the plaintiff's bar 401k. The industry reports on itself, and then that very data is used by the plaintiff's bar in private causes of action against industry. Well, why would they want to report if that's what's going to happen? And so we've got to do something about fixing that disconnect. And that's what I mean by smartly collecting data. We need data to do risk, and we need data to evaluate things, but we don't need data to just hand it over to the lawyers to sue everybody. Okay? And then I think we need to remain mindful that I'm talking about these things as being bad, and they are bad for us, but they're really good too, right? They do a lot of really good things for us in the world. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater either. And so, you know, what's the big picture? Bottom line is, you know, we're all going to die. 100% of us in this room are going to die. I doubt it's from PFAS, right? We eat like crap. We're overweight. We drink too much. There's a lot of other reasons we're all going to die, and it ain't because of PFAS, okay? So I think we need to kind of look at that. The other thing is we've got to start to change how we do risk. One of the issues we've got with risk is that we frequently rely right now on these linear, non-threshold dose-response models, the idea that there is no acceptable threshold. And the recent science suggests that there are, in fact, thresholds. And we could be more biologically accurate by establishing a threshold which exists, but which below we're going to be okay, as opposed to just this linear, no threshold is acceptable. That's what I got to say.
Any questions?
Sorry to ruin everybody's day. We're all going to die.
Okay. So one comment I want to make about the 6-ppd quinone, that's a real-time effect because 6-ppd was added to tires when they manufactured it from disintegrating. So on the West Coast, the coho salmon were dying. They've been researching for years at the University of Washington, Seattle, and finally they hit it on non-targeted analysis. So they took the 6-ppd, ozonated it, because the way it works is when 6-ppd comes off, the ozone on the ground and the heat produces 6-ppd quinone. And you should see that video. And when you add that 6-ppd quinone, the fish literally flip out in the tank when you feed them within 15 minutes, literally. And if you go to Region 10 EPA, they have a video posted, and they are the ones who started regulating first, but it's a worldwide problem on tires because since 1923, there have been several isomers of the quinones, not just one. This is only 6-ppd quinone. So with that, I'm going to introduce the second speaker of the session, and that'll be Phil Farina, and he is with Clear Creek Systems, and he's going to talk to us about treatment, PFAS treatment available today, and all the technologies. Thank you.
In the immortal words of Monty Python, and now for something completely different. One of the great things about being in a group of colleagues with older gentlemen like myself, we don't have to worry about building our relationships and our businesses and our models anymore. We don't have to worry about trying to climb the growth channel. We can tell it like it is. So it was good to hear some of these comments here today. I agree with about 80% of what he said, so I've only got a 20% disagreement. We can talk about that later. That's not too bad,
That's
right?
pretty good.
You're going to see a lot of this same thing that you just talked about under a different context. So, Clear Creek Systems, our partner in PFAS treatment, literally one of the things that everybody keeps telling me is you can't do this. You can't treat it. You can't take it out of the water. You can. And it's not that expensive. I'll show you how and why. So we're going to talk about today going from contamination to cleanup. And we're going to chart a course. So just so everybody knows, this is part of a 2.5-hour training presentation that I give to multiple states, to the EPA, municipalities, etc. So hang on, because you're going to get the entire 2.5 hours in about 26 minutes. Okay? If you really like or want to have a much better detailed presentation as to what we're going to talk about, please reach out to me. We can come and do this at your facility, flat screen, whatever you want to do. I'm going to give you a brief introduction on Clear Creek, only because I have to, because I do still need to collect a paycheck. I'm going to define the problem a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about the regulatory environment from a different perspective. And then I'm going to get right into the commercialization of how to treat this material. I'm struggling as I'm a walker. So they got me behind this microphone, so it's a little bit more difficult for me. Because I'm Italian, too, my hands will be flailing all over the place. Small company, founded in 1994, but here's the real key, okay? Clear Creek is a full-service, technology-agnostic treatment professional company. What does all of that mean? It means we can put anything into practice that you need to have. I'm not limited. I don't have to do carbon. I don't have to do resin. It's not limited. We can put anything into the system. And it's really important that if those of you who are working with anyone who is attempting to define and build a treatment system, please work with those that have the widest sphere of capacity. An ion exchange guy is going to sell you ion exchange. Carbon guy is going to sell you carbon. Don't box yourself in. PFAS, per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances, doesn't have to be a forever problem. Everybody kind of knows this by now. I'm not going to go into chemistry and all of that. Normally I do, but we know what this is. This morning, the state of Maine announced, thou shalt not eat turkey or deer shot in the state. No longer. It's no longer a food process. The reason? PFAS. That's this morning. It doesn't change every day. Yeah, it does. Something new is happening every single day in this marketplace when it comes to PFAS. What are our goals? Let's start looking at where we want to try to be. And Nick, I agree with you. This has kind of gotten out of hand a little bit. But it's something that we need to look at from a science, from a practicality viewpoint. The first thing is to reduce or eliminate what we can. How many of you will be absolutely tickled to death to give up your Gore-Tex raincoat right now, forever? I didn't see a single hand go up. How many of you would be absolutely tickled to death to stop shampooing your hair, brushing your teeth, wearing clothes? It's everywhere, guys. You're breathing it. Don't walk across this rug. You're kicking it up. It is literally everywhere. It is the complete definition of ubiquitous. So what can we do? We can do some things to reduce and eliminate what we're manufacturing. And they've tried to do that. And since 2011, they've reduced and eliminated some tiny percentage, about 27%, 28% of the world production of PFAS has been eliminated. Most of that is in the United States. Foreign countries, third world countries, they're still producing it like gangbusters. And because we don't produce it here in the United States, we can still use it. Kind of an oddball thing, but unfortunate. Reduce the waste streams that are associated with PFAS. So this would be like industrial waste products. So instead of taking industrial waste that may have PFAS in it, a bad batch or whatever, and dumping it down the sewer, treat it at the site. So put in a treatment system at the facility. So, you know, if you're dumping 100 gallons or 1,000 gallons of an industrial waste product into a waste treatment system, that waste treatment system is treating millions and millions of gallons a day. They now have to treat millions and millions of gallons for PFAS because it spreads through. If you treated 100 gallons at the site, it's easier, right? So focus as to where it comes from. Look at landfill leachate. Landfill leachate right now, because of all the things that are in that landfill, has the highest level of PFAS coming out, going into our drinking water and our non-drinking water. I had a discussion today at lunch. Water is fungible. What does that mean? That means that water doesn't know that it was in your toilet 7 days ago and in your sink today. It's important to understand that treating landfill leachate will absolutely impact drinking water. Also, biosolids. How many people know what biosolids are? POTW waste product that comes out, put it on farmers' fields. Highly concentrated material. Goes up into the corn, the soybean, the tomato. You eat the corn, the soybean, the tomato. The cow eats the corn and the soybean. You eat the cow. We see how this goes, okay? We need to find ways to handle biosolids. Just so you know, 9 states, as of this morning, have banned the use of biosolids on farmers' fields. We are creating 700 metric tons of biosolids. Big mountain of biosolids is going to be coming out our way. Control recontamination. If we can take a pound of material out of the environment and sequester it in a fashion so that it does not get back into the environment, that's a success. Destruction, and there's going to be a great discussion on destruction. I'm with you there. Destruction, in my opinion, and the beauty of being an old person, you're allowed your opinion. In my opinion, destruction is the unicorn that has yet to be born. A lot of research, a lot of money, a lot of impact, a lot of things that are happening. It's just not quite there yet. It's going to happen. It'll happen in your lifetime. We'll all see it, but it's not here on Thursday when we need it. So we're developing these destruction technologies. In the meantime, we have to do something. And that thing that we are doing today is sequestration, is the fundamental way of doing it. Anybody know how many tons or pounds of PFAS is listed in our water supply today? The US EPA lists 400,000 pounds of PFAS in our water today. 400,000 pounds. To remove 1 pound of PFAS is 6 trillion gallons of water. Start looking at this math from an incredible volume perspective. 1 ppt of PFAS is 1 drop, not any drop, but a very, very specific drop in 13,600,000 gallons of water. 6 trillion gallons to take out a pound of this material. Political environment. We all know that the political environment is fraught with uncertainty. Nobody knows what the hell's going on. They don't. You don't, I don't, they don't. Nobody knows. I'm not sure they care. So the feds have been somewhat wishy-washy, somewhat confusing. States are taking over a little bit, something to think about. The regulatory environment, the US EPA regulates, it does not enforce. The states enforce and regulate. The regulation demand by the federal government is that the state can have a regulation lower than the federal government, but cannot have a regulation higher than the federal government, except for Pennsylvania for some reason. They have a PFAS limit of 18. The feds have a PFAS limit of 4. Last time I went to school, when Ben Franklin and I used to walk together, it was 4 was less than 18. So apparently Pennsylvania's got something going on with the feds. Who knows? But the point is, if you are dealing with PFAS in your environment, look at the state's requirements. At some point in time, when federal government does get their act together, we will have a primary MCL, and I will show you what that's going to be. We mentioned very briefly, lawsuits are being filed monthly. The assertion that the EPA did not follow proper procedures, that's bogus. It's absolutely bogus. They did everything they possibly could. It will cost too much to meet the guidelines. It's not true. It can be done. Will it cost a lot of money? Nick, yes, it will cost a boatload of money. However, the treatments associated with the removal of PFAS will also take out some of those hormones that we were talking about. It will also take out some of the other medications that we were talking about. We don't really treat for these things in wastewater today, and that's where they're coming from. So the regulations are for drinking water, not for wastewater. More water is treated, or more water is generated on the wastewater side than there is in the drinking water side. So it's really important to look at both sides. Non-drinking water regulations, the beauty of it is there is no federal non-drinking water regulation. It's all states. And the states have numbers. In Nevada, it's 2,000 parts per trillion. Don't drink the water in Nevada. It's 2,000 parts per trillion. In Pennsylvania, it's 20. Other states, it's 18. Some states, it's 70. Okay? So it's all over the place. Every one of those water supplies impact the drinking water supply. So you have to be very cognizant of where water comes from and where it's going. April 10th, 2024, surprise! The EPA issues the PFOA, PFOS ruling at 4 parts per trillion, PFNA, PFHX, GenX at 10 parts per trillion, the Ph.D. required mathematical equation for the hazardous index. How many of you think this has been rescinded? Good, because it has not been rescinded. That regulation that came out in April of 2024 is law, has been published. The rule that came out in May of 2025 is proposed. It will not be even reviewed until April of 2026, and most likely will not go to rule until November of 2026. So today, right now, this minute in time, what you are looking at is rule. This is not. It is important to understand that. Everyone in this room who is waiting to do their treatment systems in 2031 may be disappointed because it's not due in 2031, it's due in 2029. Besides that, if you wait till the last minute and the number of vessels that you need to get are being sought out by everybody else in the marketplace, do you not think for a microsecond that those vessels are going to cost more? When you can, when the funds are available, when you can put these things in now, put them in. Because you not only will be treating for PFAS, you will also be treating for some of these other contaminants of concern. The question is not, do we treat for PFAS or not treat for PFAS, or treat for this or not treat for this? Do we want to have clean water for these contaminants or not? Nick is right. There is absolutely no confirmed evidence of any kind in any credible medical journal that indicates that PFAS causes any disease. It is associated with many diseases, much like consuming pickles. If you consume a pickle, you will die. Okay? Science can be squirreled around for people who are not paying attention to it. Every one of us is guilty of the following. You get something on your phone, you read the first 10 words on it. Come on, we all do it. Oh yeah, that's the thing right there, man. Boop. Right? Read the next 10 words, please. Maybe, God forbid, the next 30. Because when you get down into it, it's not what you think it is. Okay? We're not surface professionals. We need to be better at being deep professionals. What's next? Landfill leachate. That's coming hard. POTWs, publicly owned treatment works, coming hard. That's the wastewater side. Very important piece of the puzzle. Pulp and paper. You guys all that lovely shiny paper on there? How do you think it got there? That's all PFAS. And stop writing with ink, because ink all has PFAS in it. So be aware. It's everywhere. It is everywhere you can possibly imagine. All right. So that's the background. Let's talk about treatment and treatment options, what we really can do today. And what I'm going to discuss are the current commercially available treatment options. There are things coming down the pipe. There are new technologies all the time. I'm not going to talk about those today. In the longer presentation, I do talk about all of those, and I talk about all of the destruction technologies and all of those, disposal methodologies and all of that. We're gonna, because of time, we're going to talk only about the commercially available treatment options that exist. But before we can do that, we've got to have a couple of definitions. The definition of treatment is the direct removal of PFAS or any other contaminant of concern from the waste stream. That waste stream could be water, air, or a solid being soils. That is treatment. That is simply taking it from here and bringing it here. Disposal is the management of the waste products from treatment. So this could be media, this could be filter membranes, this could be reverse osmosis concentrate, foam fractionated concentrate. It's the things that you removed it to. And those are landfilled. They can be deep welled if they're fluids, and they can be incinerated. Incinerated has the capacity to be both destruction and disposal. So it's kind of a wishy-washy one from the EPA. Sequestration. This is a new concept that the EPA has recently started to promulgate, and that is the process that captures, isolates, and prevents that material from returning to the environment. If you have a pound of material and you have captured it and you have removed it in such a fashion that you have sequestered it, whether it's in a landfill or some other methodology, and I'll show you some of those, that cannot get back into the environment. So that's one less pound. So every time we remove a pound, that's one less pound. That's the only way we can do this. Because if we create destructive technologies that don't necessarily break every carbon-fluorine bond, and they create a daughter product, those daughter products are polymerizable. In chaos theory, chemistry wants to be stable. Stable PFAS is PFOA and PFOS, 8 carbons. Unstable PFASs are the 2s and the 3s and the 4s. If you give them enough time, they will become 8s, and you're right back to where you started from. So destruction technologies are coming. They don't necessarily are not here today. Benefits of sequestration, we talked about this briefly, but it is an approach that captures and immobilizes that material, and that is what your goals need to be when you are looking at this. If you're going to take it out of the water or take it out of the soil or take it out of the air, you don't want it to go back into a vapor or go back into the soil or take it out of the wastewater and put it into a biosolid. That doesn't do you any good. You need to take it out, capture it, and remove it from that system. And that's really important. It is scalable. There's a tremendous amount of well-documented technology of how this works. It is relatively inexpensive when compared to things like incineration by far and away. Regeneration, very competitive to regeneration. Way more competitive than current levels of destructive technologies. So it's something to think about very, very seriously when you're doing that. How does it work? If you have a landfill and you are using a technology, let's say it's foam fractionation or reverse osmosis or something along those lines, you've done your first step. You've taken thousands and thousands of gallons of leachate and you've created 5 gallons of a highly concentrated material. You take that 5 gallons of highly concentrated material and you put that onto a media that is designed specifically to grab the PFAS in that material. You then take the fluid and put it back to the front of your treatment system, so it doesn't leave what you didn't take out. You then take that media, you put it in a vessel, a jar, a a container of some kind. You take that container and you put that into a specially designed landfill that has a liner, has a clay liner, perhaps a fabric liner on top of that. You then have a leachate collection system. You then have a treatment system. Once you've taken it out and put it through that, it's going to be impossible for it to get back into the environment. So sequestration today is the pinnacle. Tomorrow, yes, there is a destruction technology coming that will beat this. Today, this is what we're looking at. So, how do you remove this material? There are 3 concept technologies. It is adsorption, which is basically a simple removal. Carbon and resin do this. Absorption, think of it as a sponge where you can suck it up, but much like a sponge, you squeeze it, what happens? Comes back out again? Not all of it, but some does. So you have an absorption. Those are mechanical. Let's get into ion exchange. Ion exchange is the first chemical methodology where you're giving up a chloride, creating a charge. That charge attaches to one end or the other of the molecular structure. That charge is extremely strong, very fast kinetics, has a high propensity for holding the material, and it does it in all environmental systems, whether it's high pH, low pH, acid pH, rain, and it doesn't give it up easily. It's a real strong methodology, and that's what you should be looking at to use for sequestration. Carbons do a great job, fantastic workhorse, but they don't hold it permanently. That's why you do regeneration with carbons. So let's talk about carbon. What kind of carbon is? All kinds of carbons out there. Right now, there's a lot of research on various and sundry technologies utilizing carbon. So the carbon for today, again, current commercially available technologies. The carbon for today is granular, activated, bituminous, virgin carbon. That will give you the best outcome. Regenerated, granular, activated, bituminous carbon is your second best outcome. It will not work as long. It will not work as well, but it is the second best option. Coconut, third best option if you're not looking at drinking water. Lignite and all of these other ones, they're coming. They're doing research. It's not here yet. There is some more work. So if you're going to build a system this year, and you're going to use carbon by choice, granular, activated, virgin, bituminous carbon is the material you want to look at. But it's really only good for PFOA, PFOS, and somewhat on PFBS. Not the greatest. So one of the things you want to look at is, what are my contaminants? And we'll talk about that in a minute. Multifunctional medias. These are medias that have more than one methodology. There's a material called Fluorosorb, which is an organoclay, 100% manufactured in the United States. This is a material that is a surface-modified bentonite material that works not only as an adsorption mechanism, but predominantly works as an ion exchange mechanism. So you have 2 mechanisms going here. Much faster kinetics. In carbon, it's 20 minutes empty bed contact time. Here, 3 to 5. Smaller vessels, smaller volume, less media. It will also pull out the shorter chains and Gen X. Ion exchange. We talked briefly about how ion exchange works. Gives off a chloride, creates a charge. That charge has an attraction to one end or the other. That becomes an immutable charge or immutable connection. You also have a 3 to 4, 5 minute empty bed contact time again. Very fast kinetics, very secure. PFOA, PFOS, PFBS, Gen X, really good for these smaller, different types of molecular structures. Those are the workhorse technologies for drinking water, for non-drinking water, for wastewater, for remediation, for DOD, for the Navy. Doesn't matter. Those are the workhorses. Let's get into some less workhorsey types of technology. Reverse osmosis. How many people have ever drank water from an RO system? What does it taste like? It's great. It's dead. There's no minerals in that. I'm talking about not, that's not what I asked. Answer the asked question. So you can do that when you're old, right? Yeah, sure, it's going to happen. The reverse osmosis takes out the flavor, takes out the taste, takes out all of the minerals. It does a great job, but you got to put it back in again. Okay? Extra step, more money, more energy, all the things that go with it. But you do have to also deal with the contaminant or the concentrate. That can be a very expensive piece of the puzzle. So again, if you're going to use reverse osmosis, think about that. Foam fractionation. Foam fractionation was developed in Australia. I can give you an hour's presentation on this. Suffice it to say, it's really great for landfills. It's the pits for drinking water. You will not get to 4 parts per trillion. To get to 4 parts per trillion, you will have to add a surfactant. That surfactant is a non-NSF 61 certified surfactant. So you're going to turn drinking water into something that may be really clean, but you can't drink it. Okay? Nanofiltration, ultrafiltration. This is a mechanical methodology that basically can be employed. It can be expensive. It requires trained operators, licensed operators to do it. You do have to deal with a little bit of solids at the end. You may have to deal with contaminated membranes and things along that lines. But it can be employed as part of a treatment chain. And I wish I had a heck of a lot more time because we could talk about treatment chains and trains, and we can determine how things are employed, what goes before, what goes after, what comes next. But these are parts of treatment trains. So it's not always one thing. It may be one thing, but it could be 2 things. Could be 3, depending on what your water looks like. Electrocoagulation, really great if your water is really, really dirty. You basically create a iron oxide or metallic oxide. That metallic oxide has a charge to it. That charge will grab the PFAS. It will sink, but you'll get a whole lot of other dirts and bad things in there, which is really great because you can take all of those things out, but you can't do it at high flow rates. 50 to 100 gallons a minute really is about as far as you can go with that kind of a thing. So how do we do this? They're going to give you the world's fastest 4-step approach. Number 1, understand where your water's coming from. Groundwater and rainwater are different. Well water and how it gets to the treatment system is different. The contamination levels are different. Understand where that water comes from. Work collaboratively with your treatment vendor to determine what is the best treatment for what you're going to do. Once you know where your water is coming from, do the analytical. Don't cheap out on the analytical. It is really important to understand not only what PFAS is in that water, but what else is in that water. It is critical to understand that. Once you have that, then you can start thinking about what are my treatment requirements, what are my standards? Is it wastewater? Is it drinking water? Do I have to go to 4? Can I go to 10? Can I stop at 20? Then, and only then, should you start looking at decisions, permanent, temporary. Flow rate becomes incredibly important because if you're using media, flow rate determines the volume of media that you're going to use because of the empty bed contact time. Higher flow rates, more media, on and on. Then you have to look at what am I going to do with the things that come off of that media? How am I going to manage the media? How am I going to manage the membranes? How am I going to manage the concentrates? Putting all of that together before you spend 10 cents on engineers and designing systems, you should have all of that first. That is a critical path to saving time, money, energy, and getting you to a solution directly. That is critical. So, water treatment is a science, it's not a commodity. Stop asking us, what's your PFAS treatment system? It's complicated. All right? Science does not lend itself to the lowest cost bid. It rarely is the lowest cost bid when you go through that. When developing a treatment system, the focus should be on the understanding of the water, collaboration, agreeing on what the outcome should be, prioritizing it, and then putting it together. So you're going to get to miss all of this, which was really good stuff, but at the end of the day, he's already given me the evil eye, so.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate it. In the interest of time, Phil will be at his booth, so you can ask all the treatment technology questions of him. So the next speaker is Patrick Singer. He's going to talk about the colloidal activated carbon used to reduce PFAS risk in groundwater at airports worldwide, and he's going to do a multi-site review. Please welcome Patrick Singer.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Patrick Singer. I'm the Southeast District Manager at REGENESIS. As you mentioned, today I'm going to be discussing in situ remediation of PFAS using colloidal activated carbon, and we'll talk about 3 case study sites where we used our colloidal activated carbon. So first, talk a little bit about PFAS remediation and some of the challenges associated with it. And then I'll do an introduction into what colloidal activated carbon is and where we use it. And then we'll talk about the 3 case study sites. It's 3 airports in the United States that we're looking at. So a quick company overview, a little bit of background about REGENESIS. We were established in 1994 with the inception of oxygen release compound socks. Some of you in this room have probably used those before. Since then, REGENESIS has completed over 40,000 projects worldwide in the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, and even the Middle East. And between our remediation services department and our clients that we work with, our technologies are used pretty much every day in the field. So, talk a little bit about the challenges with PFAS. All of these have kind of been mentioned by Nick already, but I want to discuss them again real quick. So one of the biggest issues is obviously that PFAS does not degrade, and it's also found everywhere. I think they had mentioned, it's been found in Tibet, Antarctica. There have been studies that show it's in the blood of polar bears where PFAS really shouldn't be found, but needless to say, it's still there. One of the other issues is complex fate and transport of PFAS, and it's not fully understood yet. Given that there's a wide variety of PFAS, it's not surprising that they all exhibit different characterizations when they are moving through the environment. There's a range of different physical and chemical characteristics that can affect their behavior. So just adds to the complexity of fate and transport assessments, and it highlights the need for assuming risk and making broad assumptions based on a few well-studied PFAS versus what Nick said, there's over hundreds of thousands of PFAS species. And then, of course, the lowest cleanup criteria of any traditionally managed contaminant of concern. So over the years, evolution of remediation, back in the 80s, most remediation was focused along physical removals. So think soil excavations and disposal, pump and treat, and really just removing the contaminant from the environment. Moving into the 90s, pump and treat, it was still being widely used and widely accepted, but started to be found to be a little bit ineffective. It could be slow and inefficient for reaching the cleanup goals at a site. And then moving into the 2000s, the early 2000s, there was more of a focus on risk-based closure, using combined remediation approaches to try to get closure, and using in situ remediation technologies as well as monitor natural attenuation to close out a site. And then today we have a much better understanding of PFAS remediation, and other remediation as well. So we no longer look for 100% contaminant of concern removal, where we have the better understanding of risk and site-specific remedial options. So obviously PFAS remediation is just beginning, compared to all the other contaminants that most of us are traditionally managing. The current state of the industry, PFAS, it's estimated that there's over 40,000 contaminated sites in the US alone that require remediation. And no one knows for sure how many PFAS remediation projects have broken ground, but participants at the Environmental Industry Summit in 2025 estimated that there is approximately 100 sites where groundwater remediation for PFAS has begun, and over 70 of those projects so far have been completed successfully in situ. So moving into kind of a new concept for PFAS remediation is PFAS monitored retention, or PMR. So the paper, PFAS monitored retention, a framework for managing PFAS contaminated groundwater sites. There's a QR on the screen here by Adamson et al., 2025. It was developed as part of a U.S. Department of Defense sponsored project to introduce the concept of PMR, PFAS monitored retention. So what it is it's essentially monitored natural attenuation without the biodegradable component to it. The paper validates PMR as a scientifically grounded and economically viable strategy for managing PFAS contaminated sites. And again, it's analogous to M&A for degradable contaminants currently that is used throughout the US. So some of the ways PFAS is naturally retained in the environment is by sorption onto the aquifer matrix. So PFAS molecules will adhere to the soil particles within a system. Another way is diffusion into low permeability zones. So we're creating a long-term storage for PFAS contamination. PFAS can accumulate or will accumulate at interfaces in the vadose zone, so at the air-water interface. And then also as the plume moves, dilution and mixing reduce peak concentrations within the plume, but are less impactful than had been previously assumed. And one of the other methods is, or one of the ways that PFAS is retained is polyfluorinated precursors transform slowly into the perfluorinated alkyl acids, which delays migration of the contaminants. So how is a plume actually managed through PMR? So to evaluate if a specific site is appropriate for remediation by PMR approach, the framework was developed that compromises evaluating various lines of evidence. So some of the lines of evidence are plume mass discharge, travel time to receptor, evidence of retention through those methods that I just mentioned, and specialized data analysis. So think about a site, if there's a low mass discharge of PFAS or a long travel time to the receptor, then the risk at the site could be managed through PMR alone. But what if the modeling shows that the receptor will still be impacted? Then we switch to PFAS enhanced retention. So what PFAS enhanced retention, or PER, is a method of increasing the retention mechanisms of PMR to meet remediation goals at a site. So where is PER appropriate? It's where screening criteria obviously cannot be met with PMR alone. So for example, similar to the last example, if we have high mass discharge and or the travel time to the receptor is very short, then the risk can be managed through PFAS enhanced retention. So again, we're increasing the retention mechanism throughout the plume to meet remediation goals. This could be done either at the source or at the distal end of the plume. Think at the source area, stabilization through sequestration, like Phil was mentioning, preventing further discharge and avoiding further plume development, or with a permeable retention barrier down gradient, stopping further plume propagation. So to do that, we use our colloidal activated carbon. So what colloidal activated carbon is it's a form of activated carbon. The first product I'll talk about is plume stop. So the carbon particles in plume stop, they're about the size of a red blood cell. They're 1 to 2 microns in size. And the carbon is suspended within a proprietary polymer that helps aid in the distribution of the amendment under relatively low injection pressures. So like I had mentioned, plume stop, it can be injected into the subsurface to create a permeable sorptive retention barrier. And what happens is, contamination's rapidly sorbed, the PFAS contamination's rapidly sorbed, reducing mobility and mass discharge by enhancing the sorption capacity within the aquifer beyond natural levels. So another form of colloidal activated carbon we have is source stop. It is used for PFAS source zones. We developed this to target those specifically. It comes in 2 formulations. There's a liquid and a solid form. And basically the need for each is based on site conditions and needs at a site. So both of the formulations use colloidal activated carbon, so it's still that 1 to 2 micron scale carbon particle, and that proven REGENESIS technology. So the goal is to prevent and immobilize PFAS where they're found at the source. So in the soils, we reduce leachability of PFAS on soils, and then in the saturated zone, we can inject source stop to prevent further discharge into groundwater, or at the capillary air-water interface as well. So getting into some of the case studies, so the first one we'll talk about is a Naval Air Station, Alameda, in Alameda, California. So the site was located, or is located, on the former Naval Air Station in California, served as a active Navy base from 1940 to 1997. The site was initially developed through dredge and fill operations, so it's pretty permeable in the area. And what happened was historical firefighter activities at the base resulted in high PFAS concentrations. And it was threatening the Oakland Inner Harbor, which is the surface body water seen to the north in the map there. So initial testing revealed concentrations up to 1 million PPT for PFOA. And these findings prompted the U.S. Navy to conduct a remedial investigation for PFAS in 2021 till 2022. And based on that RI, a design verification study and pilot tests were conducted to evaluate plume stop colloidal activated carbon as a mitigation strategy within a barrier on the site. So for the application, REGENESIS went to site and applied 720 feet of plume stop barrier along the coast there at the harbor. There were 2 injection rows parallel to the shoreline, and it was a little challenging. We were targeting zones from 1 to 16 feet below ground surface, so just below ground surface, trying to keep the carbon from 1, entering into the surface body water, and 2, surfacing out from the actual injection point itself. And during the design verification studies, we identified different dosing of the colloidal activated carbon for the different contamination levels within the discrete vertical intervals at the site. So looking at the work itself, the application was conducted over 28 days in the summer. We had 2 injection crews on site, so 2 RRS injection trailers and 2 DPT rigs. And essentially we used almost 350,000 pounds of plume stop was used to install the permeable retention barrier. This accounted for 10 semi-truck deliveries over the span of the project, over 290 injection points, and like I said before, 720 feet of linear barrier along the shoreline. So the results of that site, at the in-area wells, we saw a reduction in the 3 PFAS contaminants that we were looking at, which were PFOS, PFO, and PFBA. Those were all reduced by 99% within the first sampling event, which was done at day 84. And then down gradient, we saw over a 78% decrease by the third quarter, and those down gradient wells were about 40 feet away. So, or 30 feet, excuse me, because it was very close to shoreline. And we also recently, this year, just received an award for remediation project of the year for the site. So case study number 2, we'll be talking about the Grayling Army Airfield in Grayling, Michigan. So very similar, we did a groundwater pilot test using plume stop colloidal activated carbon. The site conditions are on screen here, so a little bit different. We're looking at, a intermediate aquifer, 15 to 27 feet below ground surface. Much smaller scale. We're looking at 9 injection points rather than 290. And soil's a little bit different. Not as much sand. It's a little more clays involved versus the California site. And the reason for this application was that there are surface body waters that were modeled out to be impacted by the PFAS contamination, as well as private drinking wells down gradient of the site. So as you can see at the bottom there, contaminants of concern, we were looking at PCE, relatively low, 8 ppb, pretty close to target already, and then 130 ppt of total PFAS. So this is the layout of the pilot test that we conducted. We had an arc orientation of injection points to try to capture the differing groundwater flows moving through the area. So again, we had the 9 direct push injection points. They were injected up gradient of our test wells, MW29C, D, and E down there, south, if you will, of the injection points. Used a bottom-up approach with 3-foot retractable screens, and only injected about 9,000 gallons of solution versus the 400,000 gallons of solution for the previous project I mentioned. But groundwater's moving toward the south, as I mentioned, and here's a field view of the wells, the stick-ups, yellow there. Groundwater in this picture is moving from the right towards the left. So here's the results of this pilot test. Blue is average concentration of PFAS coming from up gradient wells of the plume stop pilot barrier, and green is the average concentration of those 4 down gradient wells. So as you can see at the time, this was completed in 2018 initially. The reporting limit for PFAS was about 10 ppt. And over time, this is the wrong screen, but I'll show you on the next slide. Over time, the reporting limit for the lab analysis was moved down closer to 2 ppt, similar to what we have now. And but the results kind of speak for themselves here. The black line there is the application time, and you can see those down gradient wells have an almost immediate response to removing the PFAS from the dissolve phase through that barrier. Similar for the PCE concentrations moving through here. You can see, again, blue is the average concentration up gradient, green is the average concentration down gradient, and almost immediate, reduction from 6 ppb to under 1 ppb after a month. So about 6 months into this project, after monitoring those 4 down gradient wells, we added some more wells down gradient so that we could further see, are we seeing any more repropagation of the plume past that first set of wells. So we did those both 26 and 45 feet down gradient of our barrier, and these are those continued results. So again, blue is the average of the up gradient wells, green is the average of the down gradient. We installed those new wells, and as I mentioned before, over time, the reporting limit was, increased, if you will, to 2 nanograms per liter, and pretty much any time a new lab method came about, you can see that dip in the concentrations align with that. Similar, again, this is looking at PCE concentrations, and it looks at the wells discretely there. That's why there's more graphs. But again, results pretty much the same, seeing immediate reductions of the PCE there. So a question we get asked a lot about our colloidal activated carbon barriers is, does the application change the characteristics of the site, primarily in regards to groundwater flow? So at this site specifically, WSP did a pre-application slug test and a post-application slug test and saw relatively no change in the groundwater flow characteristics on site, as seen on the graph here. So a couple years later, went back to the site and looked at the source zone. So this was after the development of Source Stop, which was developed a couple years ago. In the interest of time, I'll kind of go through this a little more quickly on the design side, but essentially we had these test cells where soil was removed, stockpiled to the side, and then Source Stop was spray applied evenly to the sides and bottom of the excavation. And then that stockpiled soil was backfilled in, and Source Stop was added in to be mixed with the backfill to create a homogeneous mixture of Source Stop and soil. And again, the goal of this was to prevent leaching PFAS into groundwater and stabilize the soil. This is what the site looked like after we reseeded and added hay to the base of the application. And here are the results. So very similar. The post-treatment was looking at each of those cells directly after mixing the soil and Source Stop. And we saw 99% total PFAS reductions during that immediate testing of the soils after the application, and have seen continued over 99% reductions to this date. So last one I'll talk about is the Martha's Vineyard Airport. Again, they used colloidal activated carbon to treat PFAS at the site. The Martha's Vineyard Airport, pretty challenging site. It's on a remote island. You have to take a ferry with all of your equipment from mainland over to Martha's Vineyard. And then you have to, for this site specifically anyway, it was in December, pouring rain every day, 40 degrees or lower, and staying in not the best accommodations. I was actually on this site as a project supervisor at the time, and it wasn't great working conditions. I'll just leave it at that. So the vineyard the airport rather, is pretty much centrally located on the island. They had, again, similar to the Alameda site, fire training activities that impacted groundwater, and the plume was starting to move off site. And again, similar to the last site, there were private water wells that supplied drinking water to residents that was of concern for this project. So the goals were to reduce PFAS migration to down-gradient residents and achieve the regulatory standards for Massachusetts 6, which are PFOA, PFOS, as well as the other 4 listed there that I'm not going to read out. A total sum of 20 PPT for those constituents. And the key factors for Tetra Tech in deciding to use Plume Stop for this project were trying to avoid greenhouse gas emissions, as well as avoiding any disposal of hazardous PFAS waste. And of course, cost was a consideration for them as well. So this application was done, as I said, in December in 2022. We injected from 30 to 40 feet below ground surface at a 60-foot permeable retention barrier, about 24 injection points, and just over 10,000 gallons of solution was injected on site. So here's a real quick results. It looks at the 6 regulated PFAS compounds. So on the left are the upgradient average concentrations. You can see an increase from day 0 to day 103, which was the first sampling, 1 quarter essentially after the application. And then the two graphs on the right show the two down gradient wells, which one of them was 5 feet down gradient, and one of them was 25 feet down gradient. And the one 5 feet down gradient, you can see immediate reductions from, 3,000 ppt to about 5 ppt. And then even 25 feet down gradient saw about 90% reduction in PFAS concentrations. So, to wrap everything up, the key takeaways for this talk I want to, give to you guys is that there is a shift to a retention-based remediation. It is widely accepted, or becoming more widely accepted, based off that DoD project for the PFAS monitored retention. And then just want you to understand that colloidal activated carbon allows for efficient and fast sorption of PFAS without creating any PFAS hazardous waste. And it's our default site management role, or niche role for PFAS remediation with this colloidal activated carbon to clean up your site effectively and hopefully cost effectively as well. And with that, so last slide here looks at the PFAS remediation projects we've done so far. So all of the red flags there across the world in US, Australia, Middle East, those are all successfully completed projects. And then almost 300 more in the planning or design phase at this time. And I'll just skip through these, but if anyone wants to do the QR code, it brings you to our website, more articles for treatment comparisons, soil treatment of PFAS, talks about some of the modeling that we do with a proprietary groundwater modeling we can use that lets you know how long the treatment will be effective and how often, if more than once, a application could be needed. And then just proof of concept of the technologies as well as other case studies. And with that, I'll leave it to any questions. We got about a minute, I think.
Thank you, Patrick. Any questions for Patrick? A couple of minutes. Go ahead.
I kind of heard you there. Did you say how well does it work on short chains? So we do have third-party modeling that's available on the website by Grant Carey specifically that looks at that. It's site-dependent, but we have seen for one site in specifically I'm thinking of, it modeled out 180-ish years for PFOS and PFOA, and for some of the shorter change, it was modeling out about 60 to 80 years. But again, it can be site-dependent based on the mass discharge and the actual contaminant flux moving through the system.
Can you comment on the monitoring period the regulatory folks are requesting?
Yeah, so obviously state by state has different monitoring requirements. So it kind of depends again on the state or even the site specifically what the goal is for remediation, but typical that we recommend is quarterly for the first year or two, and then a lot of people are switching to either a annual or biannual monitoring regimen.
Okay.
Typical question, cost and size of plume on each of those cases.
Can you repeat that, sorry?
Cost and size of plume on each of those cases.
I don't have that immediately off the top of my head. I usually I shorten it down very similar to Phil's presentation there, but I do have a slide in other talks that I do. It gives kind of a scale looking at comparing pump and treat to a plume stop colloidal activated carbon barrier, and it's looking at about a third of the cost in most cases. So that's kind of the best, I guess, scale to use in comparison without any other, site-specific information.
Also, the length of the monitoring period that the maximum length of the monitoring period that is required.
At this point, the longest site we've had for monitoring is about 8 or 9 years now. And again, without having any degradation component, it's kind of just an issue where hopefully the PMR, this PFAS monitored retention, is accepted widely enough that increased and prolonged monitoring won't be needed anymore, that we can close out the site very similar to M&A for, other contaminants.
Will it be considered a full closure, or will it be considered with conditions?
I'm not 100% sure. I think it'd be conditional, but I can't speak on that at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess we have to move on to the next presentation. And the next presentation is on PFAS destruction in various matrices, and it's presented by 3 presenters: Susan Sitkoff, City of Orlando; Ryan Jocelyn, Geosyntec Consultants; and Raj Malkorti, 374 Water. So please welcome Susan.
Good afternoon, I'm Susan Sitkoff. I'm the environmental manager for the City of Orlando. Today I'm going to be discussing a little bit about the PFAS destruction in biosolids. This presentation is broken into 3 different sections. I'm going to kind of go through the city's background. I'm going to turn it over to Raj, who's going to talk about 374 Water's technologies, and then Ryan's going to wrap it up, kind of going through the pilot tests that we did. So, what is the problem? Well, the problem, as we've been discussing, is that PFAS is everywhere, and we have it in biosolids at the city. So I just wanted to give you guys a little background about the city. We currently have 3 wastewater treatment plants. We process approximately 70 million gallons a day of wastewater, which results in approximately 75,000 wet tons of biosolids per year that we have to deal with and manage. So we have a biological process. The bacteria digest the waste and ultimately goes to our treatment train. The end result is a press that splits everything into reclaimed water and biosolids. So as our panel's already discussed, there's a variety of sources of PFAS that go into our biosolids. So the last time we land applied any kind of biosolids because of pending regulations was back in 2022. So just as a reference, we had land applied approximately 56% of our biosolids, and as you know, with the forthcoming biosolids regulation and a risk assessment that was done back in 2024, we identified that this could be some potential for litigation down the road, and we've had to try to figure out other ways to manage all this waste. We already ran through all these regulations, which is great, but really this slide just speaks to just the uncertain nature of the regulatory agencies these days. We think that we have some kind of plan in place where we can deal with that, and we have a specific number that we have to meet, and then they come back and they dial things back or change things up so that we really don't have a certain future prediction of what we're going to have to manage, what levels we're going to have to meet for all these biosolids. So the city, in advance of all these new regulations trying to come into play, we applied for a grant to try out some new technologies. One of these was the supercritical water oxidation system that Raj is going to talk about next. We did a pilot test that involved a baseline study that we conducted at all 3 of our wastewater treatment plants. That was followed up by 3 sampling events that we did at Iron Bridge, which is our largest facility. And this operated for the last year, and I didn't have time to change that last bullet, but we actually just got a second grant for full implementation of this technology. So I'm going to turn it over to Raj so he can go into a little more detail about the SCO system.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I'm Raj Melkote. I'm the CTO for a company called 374 Water. I think the name and why it's called 374 will become apparent in a minute. But I will talk about the SQO technology, supercritical water oxidation. Before I do that, I really want to just shout out to Susan and her colleagues at City of Orlando. Just very visionary in terms of applying for the grant and really taking the risk on this emerging technology, which will show through some results has been pretty successful on biosolids and other PFAS-laden wastes. So just a fantastic, sort of cheerleading and championship of our technology from the City of Orlando that I want to acknowledge up front. So what is SQO? SQO, again, supercritical water oxidation. For those who remember physical chemistry, there's all substances have a critical point. For water, it's 374 C and 220 bar. We operate well above that, so we operate in a air-water mixture, 550 C plus and 240 bar plus. So very, very high temperature, very high pressure. And what we do is we then obviously use the machinery to get it to that condition, and then we inject the waste that we want to dispose of. So what happens under these conditions is, above the critical point, it's, really some funky stuff happens. It's the phase boundaries disappear, liquid and vapor become less distinct. So what that allows you to do is it really gets rid of sort of the mass transfer limitations of why reactants can't come together normally. And we actually are able to break down the CF bond. So we're actually doing something to, we call it destroy. Of course, you can't destroy mass, but you destroy the PFAS species. And this happens through an oxidation process, and it's very fast. So we have a reactor, which is kind of the core. You see that in the yellow there in the upper portion of the diagram there. And actually what's inside the reactor and the skid, if you will, the container that we have it in, is in that top right picture. So very complicated, a lot of plumbing, a lot of vessels, all required to get to the high temperature and pressure. But what it looks like from the outside, as you can see there at the Iron Bridge demo site, we have on the left a container that does the dewatering. The right side is the container which has all of the SQO equipment. So again, the reaction is very fast, takes place in the order of seconds, and what's unique and I think very versatile about this process is we call it, if we can slurry it and pump it, we can SQO it. So we can take a versatile number of wastes, basically, beyond biosolids. So why is this of importance to, the City of Orlando? I think the initial impetus for this was really not even PFAS. It was really the drastic weight and volume reduction that's possible with the biosolids. So they have, I haven't counted, but they have probably about 8 or 9 trucks a day of this sludge, dewatered sludge, that leave the Iron Bridge site every day, and they go to different parts of Florida to get land applied or land filled. If we can scale up our technology, that would be reduced to a half truck a day. So it's very, very dramatic. You can see there's a dollars and cents and logistics incentive beyond PFAS. But what we've got to do, the second bullet there is key. We've got to get to the predictable 5-day, 24-hour per day operation. That's our technical challenge at the moment. But what we have shown is that we can destroy the PFAS in the sludge and other materials, including some of the stuff that Phil mentioned, if you will, in his presentation. The other interesting thing about this, again, this is a chemical reaction. This is an exothermic reaction. Just for the chemistry nerds in the audience, I've got a sort of a model reaction there for PFOA. What it does, it's not incineration. We're very careful to say that. It's not combustion. It's oxidation. Produces benign oxidation products, water, CO2, and actually the fluorine turns into fluoride salts. But very importantly, it's an exothermic reaction, gives off heat. We harness that heat to basically do a sort of a heat exchange between the reaction products and the reaction inlet. We do actually throw away some of the heat, Currently, we throw away some of the pressure energy, but those are all future potentials for where this can become very, very energy efficient. But right now, we're just trying to get to some of the waste destruction metrics. So let me talk about that. So just kind of, visually speaking, this is, we like to show this, and we can, those who are interested to actually see this in operation, we actually show this at our site. We start with the dewatered sludge, if you will. So we take the waste-activated sludge from the city right off of their process. We dewater it to 15% or so, and then we take that into our SQO process. So the resulting effluent is very clear. It's got very low percent solids. We are able to discharge that to the drain, and you can kind of see what we end up with in the solids is very, very it's inorganic minerals, basically. So you can see the drastic volume reduction that can take place here. So this was, obviously, this pilot study was about biosolids, but we actually took the opportunity while it was sitting, this SQO unit sitting at the Iron Bridge facility in Orlando, to look at other wastes and process them through this unit at the scale. So I'm going to present some results on not just biosolids, but the GAC, the IX, and actually some AFFF as well, which as we speak, we're processing some AFFF from the University of North Carolina this week. So we calculated destruction and removal efficiencies for each media, and we were able to switch back and forth between these wastes and back to biosolids through pretty standard cleaning process. So some of the test results here, kind of shown them in terms of the DREs. Biosolids, you can see there, these are the 3 studies that Susan alluded to. Very, very good destruction and reduction efficiencies when it comes to PFAS, using sort of the standard EPA techniques, which actually Ryan will talk about. But we also looked at, under the auspices of different sponsors, but still using the same SQO unit at the City of Orlando's Iron Bridge site, other wastes such as AFFF, landfill leachate, spent GAC. Again, these are saturated media that have been used for PFAS removal, and spent ion exchange resin. You can see very, very good destruction reduction efficiencies. Actually, these are probably conservative because we were oftentimes getting down to non-detect levels in the effluent. And we assumed MDL as opposed to assuming 0 or assuming halfway in between 0 and MDL. So Ryan will talk about some of the sampling challenges, analytical results, and lessons learned.
All right, thank you, Raj. So I had the pleasure of working with Susan and Raj doing a lot of the wastewater sampling myself. It was a great exercise for a couple months. Got to get my boots on the ground. And so really I'm just looking at this from a sampling and reporting perspective. So just talking about things to consider, kind of as a consultant here, results and lessons learned. So our sample methodology included a mixture, combination of FDP wastewater SOPs, FDP's PFAS sampling SOPs, and then also our internally developed geosyntec SOPs. And this is, just to prevent any potential cross-contamination of your samples. Our methodology focused on making sure, from a wastewater perspective, that we had adequate purge time to flush all of our distribution lines, our spigots properly, decontamination of our sampling equipment, and a robust QA/QC sample protocol, including duplicates, field blanks, equipment blanks, all of that. And so during the pilot study, we had no detections of any PFOA, PFOS, or various other PFAS compounds in our field blanks or equipment blanks. Something that we learned pretty quickly is the importance of doing a site recon prior to conducting our sampling plan. And this is really just vital to make sure that all of your proposed sampling locations are free of any PFAS-containing materials. The photo on the left shows one of our proposed influent sample locations at the beginning of the project. However, the issue with this is that there were several inline ball valves that were constructed of a PTFE seat material that represents a potential PFAS source that could cross-contaminate your samples. The middle photo is just another influent sample location that was proposed using an ISCO sampler for timed discharge. But again, this discharge tubing, depending on the material that's made, can represent a PFAS sink or the accumulation of PFAS over time. And that could potentially bias your samples high. The third photo on the right, it's kind of a combination of both. We had some PFAS sources with ball valves, Teflon tapes, and the importance in this one is that's the effluent sample location. And so in all three of these scenarios, we ended up either A, choosing a different sampling location outright, or B, modifying the proposed sampling locations to be constructed with materials both on the distribution lines and then also on our actual sampling points that were made of PFAS-free materials. So I'm going to talk about some laboratory challenges. This is not a hit on any of the laboratories. We were very gracious to work with several different laboratories throughout this process between us and 374 Water. And so this is just for others to understand, the protocols and kind of lessons learned when working with wastewater samples for PFAS analysis. Due to the low regulatory limits, for maximum contaminant limits, low MDLs are a huge priority. And that's pretty tricky with wastewater because you're talking about a matrix that has a high solids content that often needs to be diluted, which may increase your associated reporting and method detection limits. So kind of the first thing that we had to go through with the lab was discussing, the sample preparation beforehand to make sure that, the sample prep methodology that they proposed to use wouldn't increase the MDLs too high and would allow our data to be, compared against the current regulatory limits. And so, during our baseline study, we observed that filtration alone was not an adequate pre-treatment. We actually ended up having to use a dual phase extraction phase separation methodology. So this included using centrifugation, which would allow us to produce both solid and aqueous matrices, albeit at a slightly increased cost and turnaround time. And then something else that's kind of important here is the variability between labs. Again, we worked with different labs, and this different equipment, the experience between the labs can result in variability with results and reporting limits, but we even observed that within labs of the same chain. And so you have to make sure that, as you're going through this process, that it's pretty open from the outset. What are your regulatory limits that you're going to be screening against? What's your goal? What's your client's goal? And just make sure that everybody is on the same page to prevent any sort of, rework. So just going on some quick pilot test results. Again, this occurred over a 1-year period. Baseline was pre-SQO system installation, and then we had a system startup and 3 additional monthly sampling events. The waste-activated sludge sample kind of represented the influent for the SQO system. And so we observed that the waste-activated sludge sample, the concentrations for PFOA and PFOS exceeded US EPA's drinking water MCLs, and then also the FDP's provisional surface water screening level for PFOS. Again, there aren't any regulatory limits currently promulgated for biosolids and for wastewater, so we're going based off of what we have, the most stringent regulations. The good news here is that the SQO effluent result, post-SQO system treatment, had no detections of PFOA or PFOS, representing essentially 100% removal, and that's the goal here. So props to Raj and his team. Talking about the solid sample matrices, this is important again because we're talking about biosolids. We're talking about materials that were previously land applied, currently landfilled through the city, which is important. And so in this case, we collected dewatered waste-activated sludge samples through 374 Water's dewatering skid. This represented about usually 6 to 9% solids content, which is about as close as we could get, for representative biosolid samples. And in this case, the SQO influence sample concentrations exceeded the FDP leachability soil cleanup target levels for PFOA during 2 of the 4 events and PFOS for the 4 events. And just to note, this is pre-SQO treatment. So this is just, if the system wasn't in play, this is what would be disposed of. And so that's, I just want to make that clear. We didn't have any samples post-SQO for solids because, as Raj said, we have essentially fluoride salts is what's kind of put out there. So there was really nothing to compare against. But again, just shows kind of the importance from a biosolids treatment perspective of why, we need to be considering technologies such as this moving forward. And so again, just a quick lessons learned, this just kind of summarize, geosyntax part of this, from a sampling reporting perspective. Site recon is important to make sure that all of your sampling locations are not causing any potential biases, that you're maintaining a strict, standard operating procedure and QA/QC regimen. It's very important, from a sampling perspective, we're talking about nanograms per liter here. And so we really need to make sure that all field staff are trained and that, there's no potential for any biased results. Again, from a laboratory perspective, you just need to have open discussions at the beginning of the project. And that's something that, we've learned from this procedure and continued to move forward with other projects. It's just important to understand sample aliquot needs, extraction process necessary, and what goals you're going against. And then finally, as everyone kind of on this panel has said, we're still operating on kind of a moving target here. The regulations continue to be developed and changed, and we just have to adapt as necessary. And that's it.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? I have one of my own, so I'll start with that. The reaction described by Raj is an exothermic reaction. So my question is, I know air is not part of it on the measurement side, but I would be interested in seeing what happens during that reaction and whether the PFAS is kind of transformed into air components, like OTM has 50 compounds, or 30 compounds.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting because there are 2 labs who do the air component part of it.
Yeah.
To measure that and see if you're converting it
To
into
shorter
the
chain
lighter
stuff.
components.
Yeah. No, we've actually done we've done several sampling events on that. Actually, the AFFF campaign that we're running this week, we're doing air sampling, and we do a full fluorine mass balance around the system. So we're pretty convinced that we're not just breaking down into the shorter, C4 minus PFOA species. What we do is we do have HF sometimes, and we make sure that we neutralize that. And that's done more for the metallurgy of the equipment, but we are able to detect HF in the stack and make sure that it's not there.
Yeah. Do you have any corrosion issues because of that, or?
No, we don't have, we try to catch it and, put in neutralizing agents in the effluent before that happens.
That's all I had. Go ahead, if y'all have any questions.
Flow rate and how long is the batch size?
I probably couldn't give you those numbers, I guess, but I can tell you that the capacity of the system we have right now is 6 wet tons per day, roughly.
Any other
At
questions?
about 10% solids.
Yeah. He's getting the mic.
Okay, thank you. This question's for Nick. And my name is Shannon Jeffries. I'm with the Florida Power and Light Company. I work in our Environmental Affairs Division. Nick, you had mentioned that we should fund EPA research for toxicity research, and that definitely is not happening in this current administration. Can you speak to nonprofit organizations and maybe universities and academia that may be possibly doing toxicity research for PFAS?
Having nonprofits actually try to take on that responsibility. I mean, they're typically tied to grant monies, and the challenge we have is that almost all the federal dollars have been cut off completely, and although the states may in fact have some capacity under this new regime of what they're calling corporate federalism or cooperative federalism, where the federal government believes it's given enough money to the states that they need to start to step up and decide how to manage it. The states are preferentially making those decisions, and I just don't see research and development, no matter who's taking it on, happening anytime soon. At least on the private sector, they could make decisions about where they want their money to go to invest it. But for the non-governmental agencies and the non-for-profits, I mean, they're intimately tied into somebody giving them money to do those things. I just don't think there's an appetite for it.
Any other questions? If not, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well done. Give a hand to our speakers.
There's a big difference, though. The precursors have